I never thought I would be the kind of woman who would have to spy on her own family. At 60 years old, after building my import-export company, from absolutely nothing, I believed I had good instincts about people. I trusted my gut, especially when it came to family. But that Tuesday afternoon in downtown Miami changed everything I thought I knew about trust, loyalty, and the man my daughter married. I was sitting in my favorite corner booth at Cafe Bustelo, reviewing quarterly reports over my usual cortadito, when I saw him, David, my son-in-law of 3 years, the man I had welcomed into our family business, the father of my precious granddaughter. He was supposed to be in a client meeting across town, but there he was 2 tables away, completely absorbed in someone who definitely was not a client. Her name was Jennifer, though I did not know that yet. What I did know was watching the way his fingers traced through her hair, how their hands intertwined across the small table, how he leaned in to whisper things that made her laugh and blush. This was not business. This was not friendship. This was intimacy. This was betrayal happening right in front of my eyes. My hands trembled as I discreetly took photos with my phone, my heart pounding so hard I was sure the other customers could hear it. 30 years of building Rodriguez Import-Export, of learning to read people's intentions, of protecting what mattered most to me. And here was the man I had trusted, with a director position, with signing authority, up to $50,000, with my daughter's heart and my granddaughter's future, sitting there like he did not have a care in the world. But as devastating as that moment was, as much as my maternal instincts screamed to march over there and confront him immediately, I had no idea that what I was witnessing was just the tip of an iceberg that would nearly destroy everything I had worked for. The affair was heartbreaking enough, but what I would discover in the coming weeks about where our company's money had been going would shake me to my core. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had chosen a different cafe that day, if I had stayed in the office reviewing those reports instead. Would I have eventually discovered the truth, or would David have continued bleeding my company dry while deceiving my daughter? All I know is that moment changed the trajectory of all our lives forever. What I'm about to tell you is not just about catching a cheating husband. It is about discovering that the person you trusted most was stealing from your family in ways you never imagined possible. To understand how deeply this betrayal cut, you need to know how David became part of our family. I did not build Rodriguez Import-Export by being naive or trusting people easily. When you are a Cuban woman starting a business in Miami 30 years ago, you learn quickly that trust is earned, not given. Every contract, every hire, every partnership decision came after careful consideration. But David was different. He came into our lives 5 years ago as Isabella's boyfriend, fresh out of business school, with impressive credentials and genuine enthusiasm for our industry. What struck me most was not his education or his polished resume. It was how he looked at my daughter. Like she was precious, like she was worth protecting. As a mother who had raised Isabella alone after her father passed when she was 12, seeing that look in a man's eyes meant everything to me. When they got engaged, David approached me with a business proposal. He wanted to start at the bottom, learn every aspect of our operations, prove himself worthy of both my daughter and my company. I admired his humility. Most young men with his background would have expected an executive position immediately, but David spent his first year in shipping, learning our suppliers, understanding our clients' needs. He earned every promotion I gave him. When I made him executive director after 3 years, it felt like watching my own son succeed. Isabella was glowing with pride, and I felt this deep satisfaction that comes from seeing your family's future secured. David had access to our financial systems, could sign contracts up to $50,000, and I never questioned a single decision he made. The irony was not lost on me later. I had spent decades protecting my business from outside threats, conducting background checks on employees, implementing financial controls to prevent fraud. But when it came to family, I let my guard down completely. David was not just my son-in-law. He was the man I was grooming to eventually take over the company when I retired. He knew our suppliers personally, understood our profit margins, had relationships with our biggest clients. More importantly, he knew exactly how our internal financial systems worked, which approvals were needed for different types of expenditures, and how to navigate our accounting procedures without raising red flags. Looking back, I realize I gave him the perfect blueprint for betrayal. But in that moment, sitting in the cafe, watching him caress another woman's face, I still believed the worst thing he had done was break my daughter's heart. For 3 years of marriage, David had been everything I had hoped for in a son-in-law. He never missed Sunday dinners at my house, always brought thoughtful gifts for Isabella's birthday, and was genuinely devoted to their daughter Sophia. When little Sophia took her first steps, David cried harder than Isabella did. When she got sick with that terrible fever last winter, he stayed up all night in the hospital, rocking her to sleep. At work, he was equally impressive. David had this natural ability to connect with our Central American suppliers, speaking enough Spanish, to build genuine relationships while respecting the cultural nuances that many American businessmen completely missed. Our Guatemalan textile partners specifically requested to work with him, and our Colombian coffee importers trusted his quality assessments implicitly. He worked long hours without complaint, often staying late to finish reports or prepare for early morning calls with overseas partners. When Hurricane Ian threatened our Miami warehouses 2 years ago, David was there at 5 in the morning, helping move inventory to higher ground. He treated my business like it was his own legacy to protect. The financial authority I had given him seemed so reasonable at the time. $50,000 was enough to handle most of our standard purchasing agreements and supplier payments without bottlenecking everything through me. David was conservative, with approvals, always documenting his decisions, never pushing boundaries. Our accountant Carmen frequently complimented his attention to detail and organizational skills. Even our family dynamics felt natural and healthy. David never tried to come between Isabella and me, something that had been a concern, given how close my daughter and I had always been. Instead, he seemed to appreciate our bond, often joking that he had married into a family of strong women and would not have it any other way. But that Tuesday afternoon, watching him stroke Jennifer's hair with the same tenderness I had seen him show my daughter, I realized how completely I had been deceived. The worst part was not just the physical betrayal I was witnessing, it was the calculated nature of it. This was not a moment of weakness or a recent mistake. The comfort level between them, the way they moved together, suggested something much deeper and more established. My phone buzzed with a text from Isabella asking if David had mentioned working late again tonight. She was planning to make his favorite arroz con pollo for dinner and wanted to time everything perfectly. Reading her message while watching her husband's hand rest possessively on another woman's thigh made me feel physically ill. I had to tell her. But first I needed more information. As a businesswoman, I had learned never to make decisions based on incomplete data, no matter how damning the initial evidence appeared. The drive to Isabella's house felt like the longest 20 minutes of my life. My hands were still shaking as I gripped the steering wheel, those photos burning in my phone, like evidence of a crime I wished I had never witnessed. How do you tell your daughter that her world is about to crumble? How do you destroy someone's faith in the person they love most? Isabella opened the door with Sophia on her hip, both of them covered in finger paint from their afternoon art project. My granddaughter's delighted squeal of abuela almost broke my resolve. This beautiful, innocent child was about to watch her family fall apart, and there was nothing I could do to protect her from it. Isabella immediately sensed something was wrong. After 32 years of being my daughter, she could read my expressions better than anyone. She settled Sophia in her playpen with some toys and turned to face me with that concerned look I remembered from her teenage years when she knew she was about to hear something she did not want to know. I showed her the photos without saying a word. I watched her face transform from confusion to recognition to devastation in the span of maybe 10 seconds. She studied each image carefully, zooming in on their intertwined fingers, the intimate way David was leaning toward this other woman, the unmistakable body language of two people in love. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. She told me the woman was Jennifer, David's friend from high school. She said David mentioned her frequently, always in the context of helping her with some business venture or personal problem. Isabella had even felt proud of her husband's loyalty to old friendships, seeing it as evidence of his good character. But as we sat there looking at those photos together, that innocent explanation crumbled. This was not friendship. This was not business networking. This was an affair, and based on their comfort level together, it had been going on for a while. Isabella's reaction surprised me. Instead of tears or anger, she became very quiet and analytical. She asked me specific questions about when and where I had taken the photos, what time of day it was, whether I had seen them arrive together. It was like watching her shift into the same protective mode I had operated in for decades, in business gathering facts before making decisions. Then she said something that chilled me to the bone. She mentioned that David had been working late more frequently over the past year, and that several times, when she had called the office after hours, Carmen had said he had already left. The inconsistencies were starting to add up, and we both realized this betrayal might be even deeper than we had initially thought. That night, I could not sleep. I kept thinking about David's access to our financial systems, his signing authority, all the late nights he had claimed to be working. Isabella's observation about the inconsistencies in his whereabouts had planted a seed of suspicion that I could not ignore. As painful as the affair was, I had a sinking feeling there might be more to discover. The next morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual and asked Carmen, our chief accountant, to meet with me privately. Carmen had been with the company for 15 years, and I trusted her judgment completely. I told her I needed a comprehensive review of all payments made over the past 18 months, specifically any transactions that David had authorized. Carmen's eyebrows raised slightly, but she did not ask questions. She understood that in business, sometimes you need to verify things that should be trustworthy. Within 2 hours, she had compiled a detailed report that made my stomach drop. There it was clear as day, monthly payments of exactly $10,000 to something called Strategic Marketing Consultants, LLC. 18 payments over 18 months, totaling $180,000. Every single invoice bore David's signature, and every payment had been processed through our standard vendor system. The problem was, I had never heard of Strategic Marketing Consultants, LLC. In 30 years of running this business, I had approved every major vendor relationship, every consulting agreement, every marketing initiative. $180,000 in consulting fees should have crossed my desk for approval, especially since it exceeded David's individual signing authority when calculated cumulatively. Carmen pulled up the invoices on her computer screen. They were professionally formatted with detailed line items for market analysis, competitor research, and strategic planning services. But when I asked to see the deliverables, the reports these consultants had supposedly provided, Carmen looked confused. There were none in our files. I felt that familiar knot forming in my stomach, the same feeling I had had years ago when I had discovered a supplier was overcharging us. But this was different. This was not a vendor trying to take advantage of us. This was family. I asked asked Carmen to run a business registration search on Strategic Marketing Consultants, LLC. The results confirmed my worst fears. The company was registered 18 months ago, right around the time these payments began. The registered owner was Jennifer Martinez. Jennifer, David's high school friend. The woman I had seen him caressing in the cafe just 24 hours earlier. My son-in-law had not just been having an affair. He had been systematically stealing from my company to fund it using fake consulting contracts to justify payments to his mistress. The next few hours felt like watching a crime drama unfold, except I was living it. Carmen and I spent the entire afternoon dissecting every aspect of these fraudulent transactions, and the more we discovered, the more sophisticated David's deception appeared. He had been brilliant about staying under the radar. Each individual payment was exactly under his $50,000 signing authority, so they never required my approval. The timing was strategic, too, scattered throughout different months, so they would not appear as obvious patterns in our monthly reports. David had even varied the invoice descriptions just enough to make them seem like legitimate ongoing consulting work. But the real sophistication was in how he had integrated these fake payments into our genuine business operations. Strategic Marketing Consultants, LLC, was not just randomly billing us. The invoices coincided with actual business developments, real competitor research we were conducting, legitimate market expansion discussions we had been having. David had essentially created a shadow consulting relationship that paralleled our actual business needs. Carmen showed me something else that made my blood run cold. The payments were not going to a business account. Every single transfer had been made directly to Jennifer Martinez's personal checking account. This was not even an attempt to maintain the pretense of a legitimate business relationship. David was literally having us write checks to his mistress's personal account. I asked Carmen to pull up David's company laptop access logs. As director, he had administrative privileges that allowed him to process payments without secondary approval as long as they fell within his authority limits. The timestamp showed he had been processing these payments after hours, usually on Friday evenings, when most of the office staff had gone home. What disturbed me most was realizing how long this had been planned. The company registration for Strategic Marketing Consultants, LLC, was dated exactly 2 weeks before the first invoice. David had not stumbled into this fraud accidentally. He had premeditated it, setting up the shell company, designing the invoice templates, establishing the payment patterns. This was calculated theft. Carmen asked if she should freeze David's system access immediately, but I told her to wait. If he realized we were investigating, he might destroy evidence or try to cover his tracks further. Instead, I asked her to quietly document everything and prepare a complete financial audit trail. The irony was devastating. David's attention to detail, his organizational skills, his understanding of our financial systems, all the qualities that had made me trust him with increasing responsibility, were exactly what had enabled him to steal from us so effectively. As I sat in my office that afternoon, staring at 18 months of fraudulent invoices, I realized this was not just about money. David had weaponized my trust in him, my love for my daughter, and my desire to build a family legacy. He had turned my greatest strengths as a mother and businesswoman into vulnerabilities he could exploit. The affair had broken my heart, but this systematic theft felt like a violation of everything I had spent my life building. I knew that catching David would require more than just financial records. If I was going to protect my daughter and my business, I needed irrefutable proof of both the affair and the theft. Carmen and I developed a quiet investigation plan that would not alert David to our suspicions. First, I had our building security pull surveillance footage from the past 6 months. Our office building had cameras in the lobby elevators and parking garage, and I wanted to establish patterns of David's actual work schedule versus what he had been telling Isabella and me. The footage revealed disturbing patterns. On at least 12 occasions, over the past 6 months, David had left the building with Jennifer. They had arrived separately in the mornings, maintained professional distance during business hours, but the cameras caught them leaving together through the parking garage, getting into David's car. More damning was what happened after they left together. Carmen helped me cross-reference these dates with David's credit card expenses from his company account. On every single day that surveillance showed them leaving together, there were charges at upscale hotels in Miami Beach, Coral Gables, and Coconut Grove. The timing was always the same. They had leave our office around 3 in the afternoon, and the hotel charges would appear within an hour. But the most devastating evidence came from David's company laptop. As the business owner, I had legal authority to monitor all company equipment, though I had never felt the need to exercise it before. Our IT consultant helped me recover David's browsing history and email communications. The messages between David and Jennifer were explicit, passionate, and dated back over a year. But more than just love letters, they contained detailed discussions about their future together. David had promised Jennifer he would leave Isabella once he had secured enough money for them to start a new life together. He had even calculated how much he needed to steal to make that possible. In one particularly chilling exchange, Jennifer had expressed concerns about taking money from his family's business. David's response was cold and calculating. He had written that I was old and would not notice such small amounts, that the business was successful enough to absorb the losses, and that he deserved compensation for all his hard work building the company's relationships. The final piece of evidence came from Jennifer's social media accounts, which she had not made private. Over the past 18 months, her lifestyle had changed dramatically. Photos showed expensive vacations to Europe, designer handbags, luxury spa treatments, and a new BMW that coincidentally appeared right after one of our larger consulting payments to her company. Carmen and I compiled everything into a comprehensive file. The fraudulent invoices, the surveillance footage, the hotel receipts, the email communications, and the social media evidence. As I looked at this mountain of proof, I realized David had not just betrayed us. He had documented his own crimes in meticulous detail. The hardest conversation of my life happened 3 days later. In Isabella's kitchen, with little Sophia napping upstairs and the afternoon sun streaming through the windows where family photos of happier times lined the windowsill. I had decided my daughter deserved to know everything before I took any legal action. I spread the evidence across her dining table like pieces of a puzzle that formed a picture neither of us wanted to see. The financial records, the surveillance photos, printouts of the hotel receipts, and excerpts from the email exchanges that were appropriate for her to read. Isabella sat in complete silence as I walked her through 18 months of systematic deception. When I finished explaining, she did not cry. Instead, she got up and poured herself a glass of wine with hands that trembled slightly, then sat back down and studied each piece of evidence methodically. I watched my daughter transform from a trusting wife into someone I barely recognized, someone harder and more calculating than I had ever seen her. Her first words surprised me. She said she had suspected something was wrong for months, but had convinced herself she was being paranoid. David had become distant, distracted, less interested in their intimate life together. When she had tried to discuss it with him, he had blamed work stress and promised things would improve once certain projects were completed. But what devastated her most was not even the affair itself. It was the money. Isabella understood what that $180,000 represented to our family business. She knew how hard I had worked to build our financial stability, how many sacrifices I had made over the years to ensure our company's success. The fact that David had stolen from me while living in our house, eating at our table, playing with our granddaughter, felt like a betrayal that cut deeper than adultery. Isabella made a decision that revealed the strength I had always hoped she possessed, but prayed she would never need to use. She told me she wanted to gather additional evidence before confronting David. She did not want him to have any opportunity to deny what he had done or to destroy proof of his crimes. Her plan was methodical and cold. She would act normally for one more week while secretly documenting his lies, recording his false explanations about working late, and giving me time to secure all the business evidence we needed. Only then would we confront him together. As I watched my daughter steel herself for what was coming, I felt proud of her strength and heartbroken that she had been forced to develop it. David had not just stolen money from us. He had stolen her innocence and trust in the fundamental goodness of people she loved. The confrontation happened exactly 1 week later on a Friday evening. Isabella had asked David to come home early, telling him she wanted to have a special dinner together, while Sophia was at my house for the night. When he walked through the door, carrying flowers and wine, looking pleased with himself for being such a thoughtful husband, I almost felt sorry for him. Isabella had set up the evidence on their coffee table, arranged neatly in folders, like a business presentation. I sat in their living room armchair, watching David's face as his wife methodically destroyed the facade he had maintained for over a year. His initial reaction was predictable denial. He claimed the surveillance photos were coincidental, that he had been helping Jennifer with legitimate business meetings. When Isabella showed him the hotel receipts, he insisted they were client entertainment expenses that he had somehow forgotten to properly categorize. But when she opened the laptop and began reading his own emails aloud, his composure cracked completely. The romantic messages, the promises to leave his family, the calculations about how much money he needed to steal, all in his own words. There was no explaining away 18 months of documented deception. David's defense strategy shifted from denial to justification. He claimed he had never intended to hurt anyone, that he had fallen in love with Jennifer unexpectedly and did not know how to handle the situation. He insisted the money was temporary, borrowing that he had planned to pay it back once he figured out how to manage his personal life. What angered me most was his attempt to make Isabella feel partially responsible. He suggested that their marriage had been struggling, that he had felt unappreciated and overwhelmed by family pressures. He actually had the audacity to claim that working in our family business had made him feel trapped and resentful. Isabella's response was devastating in its calm precision. She told him she had already consulted with a divorce attorney and planned to file for full custody of Sophia. She had documented his systematic lying, his theft from her mother's business, and his deliberate deception about his whereabouts over many months. But the moment that broke David completely was when Isabella asked him about Jennifer's promise recordings. We had discovered from the email exchanges that Jennifer had been secretly recording their conversations, apparently as insurance against exactly this kind of confrontation. David's face went white when he realized that not only had we caught him, but his mistress had been documenting his crimes the entire time. The woman he had stolen, lied for, and destroyed his family for, had been protecting herself from the beginning. He finally broke down and admitted everything: the affair, the theft, the elaborate planning, the lies to everyone who had trusted him. But by then, his confession felt hollow and self-serving. The time for honesty had passed 18 months ago, and we all knew it. 2 days after confronting David, I did something I never thought I would do. I arranged to meet Jennifer Martinez face to face. Not because I wanted to understand her motivations or find some kind of closure, but because I needed to hear directly from her what she knew about the stolen money and when she had known it was illegitimate. We met at a neutral location, a small cafe in Aventura, far from anywhere our paths would normally cross. Jennifer arrived looking nervous and guilty, nothing like the confident woman I had seen in those surveillance photos with David. She was younger than I had expected, probably early 30s, with the kind of polished appearance that expensive clothes and treatments provide. She started talking before I even sat down, as if she had been rehearsing her explanation for days. She insisted she had genuinely believed David had legitimate authority to approve the consulting contracts. She claimed he had told her that I knew about their business arrangement and had specifically requested her services for market research projects. But as we talked, the holes in her story became obvious. Jennifer admitted she had never actually performed any consulting work, never submitted reports, never had any direct communication with our company, except through David. When I asked her what kind of market research justifies $10,000 monthly for 18 months, she could not provide a coherent answer. The most damaging admission came when I pressed her about the timing of their relationship versus the business payments. Jennifer eventually acknowledged that the consulting arrangement had begun shortly after their romantic relationship intensified. She had been struggling financially, working freelance marketing jobs that barely covered her expenses when David had offered to help her through our company. What shocked me most was learning about the recordings. Jennifer had indeed been secretly documenting her conversations with David, but not for the reasons we had initially suspected. She had been recording him because she had become suspicious about his promises to leave Isabella and marry her. She wanted proof of his commitments in case he tried to abandon her once the affair was discovered. Those recordings contained David's most damaging admissions. He had explicitly discussed his plan to gradually siphon money from our company, calculating how much he could steal without triggering internal audits. He had also made it clear that he viewed the theft as justified compensation for his work building our business relationships. Jennifer's final revelation was the most disturbing. She told me that David had been planning to eventually blame the missing money on accounting errors or vendor fraud. He had convinced himself that our business was successful enough to absorb the losses and that I was too old and too trusting to conduct the kind of detailed investigation that would expose him. Meeting Jennifer left me feeling more betrayed than ever, but also more determined to ensure David faced full consequences for his crimes. As the investigation continued, the true magnitude of David's deception became clear. This was not just about stolen money or an extramarital affair. This was about a man who had systematically exploited every aspect of our family's trust to build a secret life with another woman. Carmen's deeper financial analysis revealed additional irregularities we had initially missed. David had been manipulating expense reports, inflating vendor invoices by small amounts, and pocketing the differences, and even using company credit cards for personal expenses that he had disguised as business costs. The $180,000 in fraudulent consulting fees was just the largest component of a much broader pattern of theft. More devastating was discovering how long David had been planning his exit strategy. Email communications showed that he had been copying confidential client information supplier contacts and proprietary business processes to his personal accounts. He had essentially been preparing to steal not just our money, but our business relationships and trade secrets. Jennifer's recordings provided the most damning evidence of David's true character. In his own voice, he had described me as a naive old woman who had built a successful business through luck rather than skill. He had laughed about how easy it was to manipulate our family dynamics, how my love for Isabella had made me blind to his schemes. But the recording that hurt most was one where David discussed Sophia, my granddaughter. He had calculated how much child support he would be required to pay after divorcing Isabella and had factored that into his theft amounts. He had been stealing money partially to cover the costs of abandoning his own daughter. The emotional toll on Isabella was devastating to watch. She had discovered that her entire marriage had been built on lies, that the man she had trusted with her heart and her future had been systematically robbing her family while planning to abandon her. Every sweet gesture, every promise about their future together, every moment of intimacy had been contaminated by his deception. What made it worse was realizing how many people David had been lying to simultaneously. He had lied to me about his work performance and loyalty. He had lied to Isabella about his love and commitment. He had lied to Jennifer about his intentions to leave his family. He had even lied to our business partners and clients who had trusted him with sensitive information. The David we had known and loved had never really existed. He had been a carefully constructed facade designed to give him access to our money, our business secrets, and our emotional trust. For over a year, we had all been living with a stranger who had been systematically betraying everyone who had shown him kindness. I realized then that some betrayals are so complete, so calculated, that forgiveness becomes impossible. The decision to involve law enforcement was not easy, but it was necessary. I had spent 30 years building Rodriguez Import-Export, and I could not let David's theft go unpunished without undermining everything I had worked to create. More importantly, I had to protect other families and businesses from experiencing what we had endured. Our attorney recommended filing charges for theft by conversion fraud and abuse of fiduciary duty. The evidence we had compiled made for a strong case, documented financial transactions, email communications proving intent, and Jennifer's recordings of David admitting to his crimes. The police investigation moved quickly once they reviewed our evidence. David was arrested at his temporary apartment 3 days after we filed the initial report. The local news covered the story, describing it as a case of corporate embezzlement involving a family business. Seeing David's photo in handcuffs felt surreal after years of thinking of him as family. David's immediate response was to hire an expensive criminal defense attorney, presumably using money he had stolen from us. His lawyer tried to negotiate a plea agreement that would have involved restitution and probation without jail time. We refused. Some crimes require real consequences, and David's systematic betrayal of our family's trust fell into that category. The legal process revealed additional victims we had not known about. David had been using his position at our company to build relationships with potential business partners, then approaching them with fake investment opportunities. He had convinced at least 3 other business owners to loan him money for fabricated projects, totaling another $60,000 in fraud. More disturbing was learning that David had been planning to use stolen company funds to start a competing business with Jennifer. They had already begun preliminary negotiations with some of our suppliers using information David had copied from our confidential files. If we had not discovered his scheme when we did, he might have successfully stolen our entire client base. The financial restitution process was complicated by the fact that David and Jennifer had spent most of the stolen money. The European vacations, luxury purchases, and high-end hotel stays could not be returned. We were able to recover about $40,000 from their bank accounts and personal assets, but the remaining $140,000 was simply gone. David ultimately pled guilty to multiple felony charges and was sentenced to 3 years in prison, with requirements for full restitution plus interest and legal fees. His professional reputation was destroyed, and he would never be able to work in import-export or any position requiring financial trust again. But the legal victory felt hollow. No court judgment could restore the family relationships David had destroyed or repair the emotional damage he had inflicted on Isabella and Sophia. Justice had been served, but our family would be dealing with the consequences of his betrayal for years to come. The divorce proceedings were swift, but emotionally brutal. Isabella's attorney had advised her to document every lie David had told Every promise he had broken, and every way his deception had impacted their family. The evidence we had gathered for the criminal case made the divorce straightforward from a legal perspective, but devastatingly painful from a personal one. David fought for joint custody of Sophia, claiming that his business crimes did not reflect his capability as a father. Isabella's response was fierce and protective, in a way that reminded me of myself at her age. She had compiled evidence of David's lies about his whereabouts, his systematic deception about working late, while actually meeting Jennifer, and his calculated planning to abandon his family. The custody hearing was particularly difficult. David's attorney tried to portray him as a man who had made mistakes in business, but remained devoted to his daughter. They presented character witnesses who spoke about David's involvement in Sophia's early childhood, his attendance at doctor appointments, his obvious love for his daughter. But Isabella's attorney countered with the recordings Jennifer had provided, where David had discussed child support payments as obstacles to his escape plan with his mistress. Hearing David's voice calculating the minimum financial obligations he would have to his own daughter destroyed any sympathy the judge might have had for his parental rights arguments. The final custody arrangement gave Isabella primary physical custody with supervised visitation rights for David. He would be allowed to see Sophia twice monthly for 4 hours each visit, with a court-appointed supervisor present. The judge noted that David's systematic deception and theft demonstrated a pattern of behavior that made unsupervised access to a young child inappropriate. Sophia thankfully was too young to understand the details of what had happened. At 2 years old, she simply knew that Daddy was not living at home anymore, and that visits with him were different now. Isabella handled the transition with remarkable grace, never speaking negatively about David in Sophia's presence, while privately grieving the family she had thought they were building together. The emotional impact on Isabella was profound and lasting. She had begun therapy to process the betrayal, but I could see how fundamentally it had changed her. The trusting, optimistic woman who had married David with such joy had been replaced by someone more guarded, more analytical, more suspicious of people's motivations. But I also saw strength in Isabella that I had always hoped she possessed. She had handled the legal complexities with intelligence and determination. She had protected Sophia from the worst aspects of the situation while ensuring David faced appropriate consequences. She had even begun exploring ways to rebuild her own career and identity outside of the shadow of her failed marriage. Watching my daughter navigate this crisis made me proud of the woman she had become, even as I grieved for the innocence and trust David had stolen from her. 6 months after David's arrest, our lives had settled into a new normal that none of us had chosen, but all of us had learned to navigate. The immediate crisis had passed, but the lasting changes to our family dynamics were still evolving. Isabella had moved back into her childhood bedroom temporarily while deciding whether to keep the house she had shared with David. Sophia adapted to living with her mother and grandmother with the resilience that young children often display. Some evenings, I would find myself reading bedtime stories to my granddaughter in the same room where I had once read to her mother, feeling grateful for the continuity, despite everything that had changed. The business had recovered from David's theft more quickly than our family had recovered from his betrayal. I had implemented new financial controls requiring dual signatures on all payments over $5,000 and monthly reviews of all vendor relationships. Carmen had been promoted to Chief Financial Officer, a recognition of both her skills and her loyalty during the investigation. We had also hired a forensic accountant to conduct a comprehensive audit of our systems, ensuring there were no other hidden schemes we had missed. The review revealed a few minor irregularities, but nothing approaching the scope of David's systematic theft. More importantly, it gave me confidence that our new controls would prevent similar betrayals in the future. Isabella had begun rebuilding her professional identity, taking online courses in digital marketing, and exploring possibilities for starting her own consulting business. She had always been intelligent and capable, but her marriage to David had somewhat overshadowed her individual ambitions. His betrayal, paradoxically, had forced her to rediscover her own strengths and goals. The most surprising development was Isabella's relationship with Jennifer's recordings. Initially hearing David's voice, discussing his crimes and deceptions, had been traumatic for her. But over time, those recordings had become a source of clarity rather than pain. They had eliminated any lingering doubts about David's motivations or the possibility of reconciliation. David himself had become irrelevant to our daily lives. He was serving his prison sentence, working in the facility's kitchen to earn money for restitution payments. His requests for increased visitation with Sophia were consistently denied, and Isabella had made it clear that rebuilding any kind of relationship with him was not something she was interested in pursuing. The experience had taught us all difficult lessons about trust, family loyalty, and the importance of protecting what matters most. I had learned that even the most sophisticated business owner could be vulnerable to deception from people they loved. Isabella had learned that strength sometimes comes from the worst possible circumstances. The ending to our story came in a way none of us expected. 8 months after David's conviction, Jennifer Martinez requested a meeting with me through our attorney. She claimed to have additional information that could impact David's restitution obligations and potentially lead to recovering more of our stolen money. I was reluctant to see her again, but our lawyer advised that any opportunity to recover additional funds was worth exploring. We met at the same attorney's office with legal counsel present for both parties to ensure everything was properly documented. Jennifer had brought a small digital recorder in a folder of documents I had never seen before. Her revelation was stunning. She had been recording conversations with David from almost the beginning of their relationship, not just the business discussions we had already heard, but personal conversations where he had revealed the full scope of his criminal planning. The most damaging recording was from over 2 years ago, long before we had discovered his theft. In it, David explicitly discussed his intention to embezzle money from our company, not as a desperate response to an unexpected affair, but as a calculated long-term plan. He had told Jennifer that he had always resented working for his wife's family, that he felt entitled to more money than we were paying him, and that stealing from us was justified compensation for his contributions to our success. Even more shocking was hearing David discuss his marriage to Isabella as a business arrangement that had given him access to our company's resources. He had described their relationship in cold transactional terms, suggesting that he had never truly loved my daughter, but had recognized the opportunities that marrying into our family would provide. Jennifer's motivation for revealing these recordings surprised everyone. She had initially withheld them because they implicated her more directly in David's planning, but serving as a witness in his trial had apparently triggered genuine remorse about her role in our family's destruction. She wanted to ensure that David faced the full consequences of his premeditated crimes. The new evidence allowed prosecutors to file additional charges against David, extending his prison sentence and increasing his restitution obligations. More importantly for our family, it eliminated any lingering questions about David's motivations or the possibility that his crimes had been impulsive mistakes rather than calculated betrayal. Isabella's reaction to hearing these recordings was different than I had expected. Instead of additional pain, she felt a sense of closure and validation. Learning that David had never truly loved her was devastating, but it also freed her from any remaining emotional connection to the man who had destroyed our trust. The final irony was that Jennifer, David's partner in betraying our family, had ultimately provided the evidence that ensured he received the maximum possible punishment for his crimes. Looking back on this experience now, I have had time to reflect on the lessons it taught me about family business and the complex ways they intersect. As someone who spent decades learning to navigate the challenges of entrepreneurship, I thought I understood how to protect what mattered most to me. David's betrayal showed me that my greatest vulnerability was not in my business systems or financial controls, but in my desire to trust the people I loved. The hardest lesson was accepting that some people are capable of extraordinary deception, even those who seem to genuinely care about you and your family. David had not been a stranger or a casual employee who had found an opportunity to steal. He had been someone I had welcomed into my home, someone I had trusted with my daughter's happiness and my granddaughter's future, someone I had been preparing to pass my life's work to. But I have also learned that betrayal, as devastating as it can be, does not have to define you or destroy what you have built. Our family business survived David's theft and emerged stronger because of the controls and safeguards we implemented afterward. Isabella discovered inner strength she did not know she possessed and is building a new life that is entirely her own creation. Most importantly, I learned that protecting your family sometimes requires making difficult decisions that hurt in the short term, but preserve what matters most in the long term. Reporting David to the police, supporting Isabella through the divorce, and ensuring he faced real consequences for his crimes were not easy choices, but they were necessary ones. If you are watching this and you have experienced similar betrayals in your own family or business, I want you to know that recovery is possible. The pain does not disappear overnight, and the relationships that were destroyed cannot always be rebuilt, but you can create new foundations that are stronger and more honest than what came before. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong, even if it involves people you love. Document everything if you suspect financial impropriety. And remember that protecting your family's future is more important than preserving relationships built on deception. I would love to hear from others who have faced similar challenges. Have you had to deal with betrayal from someone you trusted in business? How did you protect your family while seeking justice? Share your experiences in the comments below. Today, nearly a year after discovering David's betrayal, our lives have found a new rhythm that is healthier and more honest than what we had before. Isabella has launched her own marketing consultancy, using skills she had developed during her marriage, but applying them to build something entirely her own. Watching her confidence grow as she attracts new clients and develops her professional reputation has been one of the few positive outcomes from this painful experience. Sophia, now 3 years old, is thriving in our multi-generational household. She has supervised visits with David twice a month, but she has adapted well to the reality that mommy and daddy do not live together anymore. Children are remarkably resilient when the adults in their lives provide stability and love, even when that stability looks different than originally planned. Rodriguez Import-Export has actually grown stronger since implementing our new financial controls and audit procedures. Potential clients respect our transparency about what happened and our proactive measures to prevent similar issues. Sometimes, acknowledging past vulnerabilities and demonstrating how you have addressed them builds more trust than pretending problems never existed. I have also learned to balance my protective instincts with the recognition that Isabella needs space to make her own decisions about relationships and trust. She has begun dating occasionally, and while my first instinct is to investigate every new person in her life, I am trying to respect her judgment while remaining available for support when she needs it. The financial recovery continues slowly. David's prison wages contribute minimally to restitution, but we have accepted that recovering the full stolen amount is unlikely. The business absorbed the loss, and we have focused on moving forward rather than dwelling on what we cannot recover. If this story resonates with you, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. I share these personal experiences because I believe they might help others who are facing similar challenges with family business or the complicated ways they sometimes intersect. Have you ever had to make difficult decisions to protect your family's financial security? Have you discovered that someone you trusted was taking advantage of your generosity? I would love to read your stories in the comments and learn how others have navigated these challenging situations. Remember, your family's future is worth fighting for, even when that fight requires confronting people you once loved and trusted. Sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is refuse to accept betrayal as the price of keeping peace. Thank you for listening to our story.